Well, good evening. I'm in protest. I'm not going to. Not only am I not wearing a tie, I'm not wearing an orange tie. I don't know exactly what that means. I don't know how much trouble that'll get me into, but we'll see.
Donko orange.
It's beautiful. It's in your color wheel. Yeah. But thank you all very much for having us. It's great to be here, and I'd like to start by making one quick plug for my newspaper. As some of you may know, I write a column for the Washington Times called The Nuclear Option. People always ask me, why is your column called The Nuclear Option? And the answer is this, that after covering Washington for 15 years, and the only sure thing that happens every single year is that Washington spends more of your money every year, and the power of the federal government increases and encroaches more deeply into your lives. When that's what you've experienced for 15 years, you know what the answer to every single problem in Washington is? The nuclear option. And then in 2015, along comes a guy named Donald Trump and runs for president. And you may not love everything about him. You may not love every Twitter tweet that he sends out. He may not be the most conservative guy, but he's the nuclear option. Whether it's foreign policy or domestic stuff, he's the nuclear option. And for that, I'm very, I'm looking for about 80% of what I want in this world, and I'm getting at least 80% with Donald Trump. So that's a very good thing. So here's my plug. We have a new app on our newspaper. It's not fake news. It's real news. If you go to the App Store, and I personally have no idea how to do this, but apparently if you go on your phone and you go to the App Store, you can download the Washington Times app, and you will get actual, true news in real time whenever you want it. So that's my plug. Again, thank you very much for having us. I wanted to begin. We've got three of the most principled conservatives in Congress. This is not what's wrong with Washington. And as I mentioned a minute ago, Donald Trump is not a conservative. I feel like I'm saying this all the time to all the left-wing reporters who are attacking Donald Trump for not being conservative enough. And you have to explain to him, the guy, he's not conservative. He never ran as a conservative. But you have to acknowledge that let me just get each of you to answer the question. When you look at the victories for conservatives over the past almost year and a half, what have been the biggest accomplishments, the biggest things conservatives should cheer for that we can give Donald Trump credit for?
Yeah, I think when you say he's not a conservative, he's actually passed probably more conservative pieces of legislation and done more for the conservative cause than any previous president since Ronald Reagan. Neil Gorsuch. Neil Gorsuch is a prime example. When you really look at moving the embassy to Jerusalem, the eternal unified capital of Israel. So. Those are two big ones, and since we've got others, I'll let them answer the rest.
And try to think of ones that we don't. Obviously those are two great ones. But if you can think of other examples that people might not be at the front of people's minds.
Well, one of the first actions that he actually did was a hiring freeze of federal employees, which has been amazing. And then something I spent a lot of time in my world from the natural resources aspect is rules and regulations. Streamlining them, 22 are taken down for everyone move forward. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah. I was going to talk about regulations also, and I agree with that. I thought it was 27 for everyone. But, he made a promise that so many presidents made about moving the embassy to Jerusalem, and he did it. He made a promise that he was going to take down 2 regulations for everyone that he enacted, and he did 22, 27 for everyone. And it's just amazing that this president, more than any president I can think of, Republican or Democrat, has been keeping his promises. And that's an amazing thing in Washington, D.C. But I want to tell one really quick story, if I can. These ties have some significance beyond just being Bronco orange. You see Super Bowl 50, my friend from Carolina and I had a bet.
It is not a good
I bet on the Denver Broncos, and he bet on the Carolina Panthers. I bet a case of T-bones against his Carolina barbecue, and that barbecue tasted delicious, let me tell you.
But I will get the last word, I promise. But getting back to your other point, some of the things that people may not have known is so here is a president that maybe was not viewed as the most conservative, but yet the Mexico City policy that literally made sure that life is protected, he reinstituted in a way that no previous president had ever done. So he was actually more pro-life in that regard, and actually took executive action to defund Planned Parenthood, which we've been trying to do for 35 years. So those are some of the things that people don't know.
And the other thing, Charlie, the other thing he did just recently was he made the Department of Justice support a Colorado baker in a United States Supreme Court case that the Colorado baker won. He reversed the Department of Justice on that issue.
So, obviously Washington is filled with Republicans and even conservative, real principled conservatives that, I admire their conservatism and everything. But a lot of them who turned hotly on Trump and never saw the value that he could possibly offer. Obviously, those of us on stage saw very early on that even if he wasn't, down the line exactly where you want him on every single issue, that there was something of value there, that he had something to offer conservatism. Go through exactly where you were and how you sort of arrived at that, that realization. The realization that so many of these conservatives back in Washington never did, still haven't arrived at. They're still up in the mountains fighting.
Well, I think for me, what happened was I saw him on the campaign trail. North Carolina was one of those critical states, so we got to see him a lot more than most. And he was not the first candidate that I supported, and yet what I found were there were not a whole lot of members of Congress who were willing to campaign with him in North Carolina. So I'm in the West. It's about 12 hours from one end of the state to the other. And so I was all over the state. But what I found was his message was consistent. And each time he would go, he would keep a consistent message. And the other thing is backstage, and this has been, I don't know that it's ever been reported. You could see him go out, and the crowds were unbelievable. By the way, it is so good to see so many deplorable people here tonight. I mean, let me just tell you, it is so good to see you. But, where I come from, I believe that everybody is redeemable, and we must remember that. But so he would go out and give these speeches out there, and the crowds would go crazy, and they would cheer, and there were pickup trucks miles out waving American flags. But he made us proud to be Americans again, where we were not afraid to salute the flag like we should be doing. The other is he made a believer out of me behind stage. When nobody could see it, when the cameras weren't there, he would take time to make sure every single law enforcement officer got a picture with him. He would look them in the eye, kids that were coming there, teachers, reach out to janitors. I saw the person in Donald Trump that I said, you know what? This guy doesn't just talk the talk. He walks the walk when nobody's looking.
It's kind of amazing at every turn now. The concept that standing up for law enforcement is a radical idea. Wow, how far did we go in 8 years that's a radical idea, and one that obviously everyone in this room and across the country is so grateful that to have a commander-in-chief that views things like that. Describe how you all arrived at your.
Well, for those that don't know me, I'm a dentist impersonating a politician. And one of the things that I found refreshing was I'm tired of playing defensive politics. I like the way he went on offense. And he didn't take no for an answer. He was like a junkyard dog. He bit, and I'm one of those people that likes to bite. So when he bit, he held on, and he made you dislodge from him. but he got into their space. And America saw through the aspect of they needed somebody that disrupted the status quo in Washington, D.C. That's when I saw it.
I'm glad I'm sitting next to the pit bull here. Charlie, it was interesting for me. I was the state chairman for the Ted Cruz campaign in Colorado. We got every single delegate in Colorado for Ted Cruz. Donald Trump referred to our group as Nazis. I've yet to see him walk that back, but I'm not sure he has to. He's the president, so he has.
He often doesn't walk things back.
Yeah, I know.
Kind of funny.
But we got to the national convention, and obviously it was time to support Donald Trump. And I stood up in front of the Colorado delegation that was there, and I said, "Look, in Congress, I get a card, and I get to push a green button for yes and a red button for no. If you push the red button, you're electing Hillary Clinton. If you push the green button, you're electing Donald Trump. It is time for us to push the green button. It's time for us to go yes. It's time for us all to get behind this man and support him for President of the United States." When you say that Donald Trump isn't perceived as a conservative, let me tell you something. He is more conservative than Hillary Clinton.
That is true, and I would argue he's more conservative than a lot of the conservative Republicans that we've had in Washington for a long time. If for no other reason, just the fact that he does get things done. He doesn't care what people think. He's going to fight that fight. And I have to say that one of the most refreshing things I find about him is that he doesn't apologize. He doesn't walk things back. You know that he regrets something that he said that he shouldn't have said, but he just doesn't say it again. But he's not. All of this apology stuff just doesn't exist with him, which I think is a refreshing thing. Refreshingly honest, anyway. Obviously, it's not all fun and roses right now. The last omnibus spending thing was a disaster, and we blew all of the. It's kind of funny to look back at Speaker Boehner and see when you look at the trajectory of spending. Boehner got a lot of grief for a lot of stuff, but it was what he accomplished that bent the spending curve, unlike anybody has ever done in recent times. So where do we go in terms of actually when it comes down to actually spending? How do we fix? What's the strategy there? Because a guy like Donald Trump, who's willing to fight those big fights and take unpopular positions, he doesn't seem to be something he's too animated about right now.
Well, I think the president's animated about it. I mean, when he signed it, he almost vetoed the $1.3 trillion.
But the reason that he was going to veto it wasn't the good reason. It was that he didn't like some of the he wanted more military spending.
Well, yes. I mean, he wanted more military spending, but what he also did, he didn't want to give a 13% raise to the federal government in the non-defense side of it. I talked to him about that. He was very close. So here's the problem. The problem is not the president. The problem is Congress. I mean, it's time we get a backbone. I mean, it's time, and Ken, I'm sorry, we're in your district here, and so I'm going to say something that, you got a bunch of duds up there. I mean, let me just tell you. I mean, here they have backbones of a banana. It has great shape until you peel it back, and then it gets all mushy. I mean, I'm telling you, it is time that we get a backbone, and so it. So by saying that, what we're going to have to do is I think that we're going to have to hold the line in the House and in the Senate. And if not, Ronald Reagan used to say, if you can't make them see the light, they need to feel the heat. We need to feel the heat.
I think there's a good process builds good policy, builds good politics. It's that simple. And once again, this leadership team in the House and in the Senate is basically the same leadership team that we've seen before. It's the same old rhyme, same old verse, but you're not going to get the same, and you're not going to get a different response. And so my opinion is, and I'm one of the first people that has said it, it's time for Paul Ryan, it's time for this leadership team to go away. And we need to bring new people back.
You just made
And that should be done before the general election.
Do you think that that's going to happen?
You know, we're in treacherous waters right now. We're going to have a Queen of the Hill discussion probably in the next couple of weeks. You know, we've seen miscue after miscue. We've got a budget that's coming up, you know, that ends at the September 30th. Where are we going on that one? And all we see is leadership dictating what the policy is instead of empowering the members of Congress. So you know what? I think America, you know, understands that we need a new step in the House, and we definitely need a new step in the Senate. And the only way you get that by holding the Senate accountable is having a new leadership team in the House.
Explain what exactly, because I've never understood this. I mean, I would think that if you're going out to win an election, you're looking to keep the House. The best way to do that is with a positive agenda, with somebody that you're promoting as part of that positive agenda. It's not, you know, a lame duck sort of thing. You know, a lame duck isn't the face of victory and so what's the thinking there? Why even play this game of having a lame duck remain as speaker?
You better answer that.
Well, I'm not in favor of a lame duck, and you wouldn't have had a lame duck if somebody else had 218. I'll just tell you that right now. You know, we basically have to have the ability, you know, the speaker in the House is third in line of succession. You have the president, you have the vice president, you have the speaker. Too long, it's been done behind closed doors. This is an American issue. This is an American position, and it needs to have the resolve of the American people, as well as to have good process to build that great policy. The second part is, yeah, the House has done a lot of different bills. 500 are sitting over in the Senate. Where was our leadership when it came to a conference committee? Look, these conference committees and those are when you have two different bills, one coming out of the House, one coming out of the Senate. You're not actually having a conference. That's all done by charades. Why don't we actually do this? Make the Senate pony up their members. They each get a staff member. House members get their staff member. We throw them in a room, give them some beans and rice, some prune juice, and some coffee. Lock the doors. When we see the white smoke that they got something they can vest out of, then we'll let them out.
Charlie, I am much more focused on the what than the who. I don't care who the leadership is in the House. What I care about is what we do. We need to have term limits in the House, and we need to throw the bums out after 10 or 15 years. We need to have a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. We need to empower the chairman of the various committees and get power away from the leadership, controlling what gets on the floor and what doesn't get on the floor. We need to actually sit down with the few reasonable Democrats that exist in the United States House of Representatives and have that conversation about what we can pass in a bipartisan way. There's a lot more overlap than leadership ever allows. They keep the House divided and fighting against each other for partisan reasons that most people have districts. And by the way, Mark, this is not my district. Nobody will ever confuse Denver, Colorado with the 4th Congressional District. I just want, we've
been all over Colorado. We've been in your district. I forgot that this was the one place that was
If you look east, you can see freedom from Denver, Colorado, okay?
And what is it that you smell everywhere walking up and down the street in Denver?
Those are burning leaves, buddy. Those are burning leaves.
Mark, you look like you wanted to say something about
Yeah, I think the big thing is the American people are tired of broken promises, and that's the reason why they like this president. He's not breaking his promises. You know, a lot of you invested your time, your talent, your money, I mean, literally to give us a Republican House. And what you were told was, well, we can't really get it done. You need to give us the Senate. And so what did you do? You went out, you spent your time, your talent, and your financial resources, and you gave us the House and the Senate. And then you said, well, no, that's not really enough. We need the White House. So you went out and you spent your time, your talent, your money, and you gave us the House, the Senate, the White House. And now we're saying, well, we need 60 votes in the Senate. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Enough of the talking. It is time that we get it done. I think the nuclear option is a great option. And we need a nuclear option in the Senate. It is time that we have a nuclear option in the Senate. Drain the swamp, baby. I love it. I love it.
Good book.
It really is amazing. I remember covering in fact, the name of my column comes from the phrase nuclear option in terms of the judicial nominations that were being held up by Bush back in the aughts. And but it's amazing to look back at the whole debate back then about whether or not to invoke the nuclear option. And most reasonable people thought, oh, no, this would be terrible. But then, of course, what happened, the first opportunity Democrats had, they did it. And so you get burned like that, and pretty soon all bets are off.
Well, I can tell you that if the Democrats take back the Senate, they will deploy the nuclear option.
Absolutely.
So we might as well go ahead and do it while we have all three places.
How Paul Ryan obviously has a good record as a representative, as a conservative. How would you rate, each of you? How would you rate his speakership?
Daggum, Charlie. You said you were going to ask easy questions.
I never said that. I just wasn't going to wear that orange tie.
Listen, I get back to what Ken said. It's not as much about the person. It's about the process. Here's the problem is when you allow one speaker and one minority leader and one majority leader and a minority leader in the Senate to negotiate a $1.3 trillion spending bill, just the four of them. And, well, I take that back. It wasn't the four of them. It was their staffers who got in a room and negotiated it. That's not what our founding fathers thought we should do. We need to have everybody's voice in there and figure it out. And so for that, I think that's why we need a change.
Personalities aside, Paul's a nice man. The problem is leadership comes at a price, and you have to deliver on leadership. You can be my best friend, and if you don't deliver, you're out. That's the way we should be working on this. And so good policy is driven by good process. This is one of the worst Congresses for closed rules ever. They don't take the input from Mark and myself and Ken. Our bills are buried. The problem is you got to let the system work. Folks, since I came in the big wave in 2010, we have turned over 80% of Congress. Mark gave you a great explicative about what's actually transpiring. Why aren't we getting results? It's because the leadership is exactly the same. Exactly the same. If you want to shake it up, you got to shake it all the way up. That means, we're talking about the nuclear option in the Senate. Why were we doing that from day one? Why wouldn't Mitch McConnell say to his Senate colleagues when Chuck Schumer came to him, Chuck, I'm glad you're going to use 30 hours for every appointee. Guess what? You'll be able to tell the rest of your colleagues that we're going to be staying here on weekends. I'm bringing out the IVs, the beds, and the medics. We're going 24/7 till I break you.
The only thing the Senate does well is take naps. And they do hip replacement exercises extremely well. They're the two things that the Senate does, and that's it. And I got to tell you, it is so frustrating to have 500 bills from the House sitting over in the Senate. So if those 500 bills pass the Senate, we'd be saying Paul Ryan's a great leader. Those bills don't pass the Senate, and we're looking at what kind of leadership he has. And frankly, I think it's as much a followership problem as it is a leadership problem. We have a bunch of people in the United States House of Representatives who don't realize that they're Republicans. They went out and they ran to balance the budget. They promised that they would reduce the size of the federal government and then voted for a $1.3 trillion package. They have promised America that they would get the federal government off the backs of businesses, and then they ignored the regulatory burdens that are being placed on people. We have a bunch of people in the United States House of Representatives that don't care. They want to get reelected more than do the right thing for the American people. So Paul Ryan, if you look at the record in the House, Paul Ryan gets an F. If you look at why we have that record, it has as much to do with the members in the House as it does with Paul Ryan.
I want each of you to take off your politician hat and put on your pundit hat for a minute, and tell me are Republicans going to hold the House? And what happens in the Senate this year?
Well, if I'm going to put on my pundit hat, do I get?
You don't have to be right. Do
I get as many spots on Fox as you do? So my estimate is we lose 18 House seats, which means that the Republicans keep a slim majority in the House, and I think that we pick up 3 Senate seats. And so you heard it here first.
I'll hold you to it.
I think it depends upon what happens in the next 2 months, particularly on this immigration issue. I mean, if you take, for example, in my state of Arizona, we elected Debbie Lesko. It's an R18, and she won by 4 points. That was because we kicked the American people in the teeth with a $1.3 trillion deficit spending in our omnibus bill. And we could have had an immigration bill that we had an orchestrated discussion with the American people, piece by piece by piece. Trust is a series of promises kept. That's what comes back to leadership again. So if we're going to see the Queen of the Hill, and particularly seeing a bad bill coming out of immigration, I think we lose the House. And I think we actually just keep the Senate by 1 or 2.
The blue wave is a blue trickle. We have the best economy we have had in a long time. We have the lowest unemployment we have. Our labor participation rate is much better than it was. If you compare the first 2 years of the Trump administration with the last 8 years of the Obama administration, it is absolutely inconceivable to me that the American people would walk away from Big Red, and they're not going to do it. They're going to adopt Republicans. We will have a Republican governor here in the state of Colorado. We will have a Republican attorney general here in the state of Colorado who respects religious liberty and will not bring cases against Christian bakers who do not deserve to be persecuted. And I think Mark's right. We will lose a couple of seats, and it's based as much on candidates as it is on politics. And I think overall we will gain in the Senate, and we will see a new Supreme Court justice that won't waver with the wind, but will consistently support conservative causes. And the Supreme Court will ultimately decide a lot more issues in our favor down the road.
Well, certainly in 2016, I think that one of the very most important issues was the Scalia vacancy. And for that reason, I have always sort of, you have to give Mitch McConnell credit where credit is due. The fact that he walked out there and said, nope, we're not going to talk about a single person to replace Antonin Scalia until after the election. That was a gutsy move. And I think not only did it work out, obviously, to our advantage, but nothing gets conservatives out like the issue of the Supreme Court, whether they're doing judicial activism from the bench or whether it's putting good jurists on the court.
Good Colorado jurists.
Yes.
Good Colorado jurists.
And of course, the reason is because all of you are principled. And on the left, there's not an ounce of principle among any of them. They don't care about anything. They just want to win. But principle actually matters. And so I wanted to ask, that was my next question, is do we get a vacancy in the next couple of weeks on the Supreme Court? And if we do, what does that do for the political map? You don't know anything.
Yeah, I don't know. I want to preface that. I think, just because of the timing of that, obviously you look at Kennedy and whether he's going to go ahead and, all the opinions come out this month. And so as they finish that up, it would be a prime time for him to do that. I think the real key is it's real iffy right now in terms of the Senate, because even where we are, we really don't have it's razor thin. And so if I had to handicap it, I said they would wait until after the midterms to see how that goes and to see how confirmable a new justice might be. And so I'm not one that's thinking it's going to happen in 2 weeks. It could, but
Okay, but if it did, is that going to? Do you think that helps Republicans or it helps Democrats?
It definitely helps Republicans, because I think that then every Senate race becomes a referendum on who's going to confirm that next, and are we going to confirm a conservative judge and justice? And so yeah, I think it helps Republicans definitely, but most of the Supreme Court justices don't look at it politically. We do. But they don't necessarily look at it. They look at it from a legacy standpoint. And Justice Kennedy has, obviously opined on this most recent case in a real way, and so that may be his final majority opinion.
Charlie, I attend the State of the Union addresses, and I watch the Supreme Court walk into the chamber, and I got to tell you something. It doesn't matter whether someone retires or not. There is going to be an opening in the next 2 years.
I knew that was coming.
When those octogenarians can't stay awake, when President Donald Trump is talking, it is a message to America that we need every conservative to get to the ballot box and elect a Senate that is going to confirm a conservative justice.
Well, we've got about 15 seconds left here. Thank each of you for taking the time, and most of all, thank all of you all for having us and listening to us.
Yeah, can I say one thing?
Yeah.
Do not grow weary in well-doing, all right? Keep the faith. We're going to take back this country. God bless you.
Please welcome the chairman of the Western Conservative Summit. Here's Jeff Hunt.
Hey, Ken, come here. Come up here. Come on over here. Friends, when you have in your own hometown the #1 most conservative member of Congress, that's something to celebrate. Ladies and gentlemen, Ken Buck. Great job. Great job, buddy. Good job.